Hello and welcome to Service Binding Operator Developer Meeting. We got a couple things on the agenda for today. I think first up is me discussing my plan for upstreaming tests. So last week I proposed to the working group the idea of having some kind of conformance test suite. Just so like you could say, or you could just run a set of tests and understand what parts of your operator fully implement the spec, what parts don't implement the spec, and where you kind of differ from how we're interpreting the spec. And so I kind of proposed that we already have a bunch of spec related tests in our acceptance test suite and SPO. Would it be possible to reuse them? And apparently the working group found it to be a pretty good idea. And so my next step is to start taking some of our tests and porting them over to the conformance test suite. My initial plan for that is because there's currently nothing there. My current plan is to basically just bootstrap ourselves there. Right now, that kind of looks like from the outset of getting some initial infrastructure going. I just enough to start running some very, very simple tests. And the initial pull request will probably just be one that shows off provision services. I'd also like to throw in a global assertion that if you don't support the spec CRD for creating service bindings, then we're not even going to bother running tests because there's nothing that's going to happen. But once that's done, I think I'll just start keep adding tests on top of that until we've effectively duplicated our spec related tests, and everything that was spec related out of our acceptance test framework should live in our conformance test suite. That's about all I have on that front.
So Andy, did you identify scenario we would like to submit as a part of that pull request?
Yes, I did. There's one that was in particular I just pulled straight out of the provision service scenarios.
Can you show us which one is that?
Yes, give me 1 second. So this is the scenario identified as the one I'll probably just be submitting upstream initially.
Okay, and where do we kind of create provision service in the secret?
That's part of the background.
Okay, but I mean, secret and provision backend. Yeah, but for the sake of clarity, since this is initial, background makes sense when you have more than one scenario.
Yes, yes.
I would
Just right
I would
now,
put
just
this everything
straight
into
copy
this
paste.
scenario. Yeah, I would put that everything in this one scenario with all these kind of things. Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Mhm.
Yes, I was probably going to do that. But yeah, right now as it stands, what I have in here is just pretty much a straight copy paste from what was living in our test suite.
Okay. And so the idea is now, given the steps we have here, you're gonna cut out of the current code base only the minimum needed to run those steps.
Yes, that is the intention. Modulo feedback from the working group.
Okay. Oh, anything to add?
No, go ahead.
I agree that it should be part of the scenario itself, unless you, of course, expect more scenarios. Say in the ground to be there.
In the long term, yes, as it stands right now, that's not the case.
It's it's always good to have everything as much as possible, of course, in the scenario itself, so it is like self-contained, especially when you want to use it to present the feature itself, the scenario itself, not just a definition of a test, but also to explain the actual behavior.
Yes, I would agree. Are there any other questions on this?
No.
I would also, suggest that now it's residing inside within the scenario. You might also want to use the scenario ID, just to correlate those names to the scenario itself.
Yes, yes. I was going to do that. I haven't, if I'm going to be honest, I haven't spent a whole lot of time on this. I've been working a lot more on workload resource mapping. This is the product of about 15 minutes of work.
Sure, of course. Just suggesting what I'm seeing, so
yes,
I'm not blaming you.
I would agree. Yes, that's definitely something I'll do before I go submit this upstream. That's the case. If there are no more questions, then I think we can move on to the next topic.
Sounds good. Thank you, Andy. Yeah, for this one here, it's just like a follow-up from a few weeks ago when we were kind of following up on the SBO GA notification and advocacy. Just want to kind of understand if there has been any updates, any responses from the groups that you've reached out to regarding SBO being available now, and any questions or concerns from the users, consumers that we've engaged with in the past. Andy, Pavel, Predrag?
No, nothing. I didn't hear anything new from that list.
Okay.
Me neither.
Andy?
Kind of the same boat I'm in. I haven't really heard anything new on that front. To address specifically conference talks, I have looked briefly at that. I think there's like one or two that I saw on bookmarks. Like there's like KubeCon, but I don't really know the details of that off the top of my head.
Okay. It may be good to start capturing that in maybe a doc or a wiki somewhere in our pages, so you can start to look at this and kind of get ahead of the dates and so forth.
Yes.
Okay.
I can do that.
Okay. We did reach out to the Database as a Service group, just to kind of make some connections with them as well. So we've started the conversation and are looking to set up a call probably after US Thanksgiving to discuss like what other topics that they may have regarding how they would want to use SBO and the different frameworks that they have in place today. So just wanted to share that with this group. So hopefully we can we'll get more details out of them to see where we are. Okay. And I believe I heard and I saw that Managed Kafka is looking to depend on SBO as a dependency, or mark SBO as a dependency. Right. So hopefully we can continue to build that relationship with them to make sure that we continue to help assist whatever they need going forward. Okay. Okay. Please let us know if there's any updates. Let's see what we can do to make some progress in these areas. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. And then are there any other questions on this topic? If not, then I think it's back to me. The other thing I've been working on besides upstreaming our test towards the spec is completing the last feature that is part of the spec that we don't implement, which is workload resource mapping. As it stands right now, I've been writing some acceptance tests to get that going, just to get a better understanding of how that feature kind of looks from a user's perspective. If you want, I can go share what I have so far.
Sure.
This is what I roughly have so far. It's not a whole lot. As it stands, there's 4 scenarios that live in here. Just taking a brief scroll through. I currently have them disabled just because, well, they don't work. We don't have the feature implemented yet. But it's a start, and once I start getting implementation and a bit more solid of a footing, I'll be using these to test to make sure that it works as expected.
Okay, can you just briefly describe what is the essence of each of the scenarios? So I see can you go briefly navigate us through that? So behavior weight.
So workload resource mappings, to make a long story short, they're very similar to the container path field from our side of the API. They let you go specify kind of where a pod lives and some custom resource spec, and it'll go pull out all the relevant information from there. Right now, all the tests I have right now basically say that if they're effectively identity mappings, and that we don't try to do anything particularly special with them. And we assert that if we have these deployed and try to bind as usual, bindings should still work. That's the rough overall strategy to these tests so far. There's a couple things that the spec also specifies that can happen with these, but I haven't written any tests for those yet, and I'm not entirely sure how I'm going to do some tests on that front, because it requires a bit more effort on the testing side than it will be on the implementation side.
Okay, that's one scenario, and you say there's the 3 more, right?
Yes.
Can you tell us a bit more about the others?
Again, they're basically they're largely the same. In that they go set up a binding or go set up a workload resource mapping, attempt to bind, and assert that binding works. The only real difference between them all is what they're binding against. For example, this one up here is specifically asserting that we're binding against it, or is telling us how to bind against deployments. Because right now we kind of have that statically defined in our code. This is a more dynamic way, I guess, of determining where the pod specs for deployments live. We have some in here for app configs. And this is where we go declare app config. And we have some for some more bespoke applications that live in our test suite.
Okay.
Make sense?
Mhm.
Am I not clear on anything?
Right.
Are there any other questions on this? If not, then I think we're done with this. Finally, I think we have standing topic of issue triaging. Is there anyone who wants to drive this particular topic today?
You want to bring up the GitHub repo and see what's there?
Sure. So this is what we have under issues.
Yeah, there is no any new issues.
There's not a whole lot new.
Okay. Actually, nothing.
Yeah, most recent issue is this.
Okay.
So there's not a whole lot new on this front.
Any questions on this store issue? Just curious. Or do we understand what we need to do here? What the situation is?
Well, the problem is somebody from Edge Kafka team reported that they are not able to to project bindings into jobs, and the reason for that is simply that the job resources are immutable after creation. So, and we, as a service binding operator, we modified resources by adding secret references to them. So that's not possible to do after job is created. And so we would need to think about hooking up into the creation process of that job, and then immediately to add references to secrets. This implies there's some kind of implication of that if you want to bind to such resource like job, you would need to create first service binding, and before the job is created, and you kind of practically you want to point to non-existing jobs. So initially, your service binding would fail because the service binding operator would not find it. But like what in the time of the creation, then we would be able to possibly detect that there is a service binding already in the same namespace and then do necessary projection. Yeah, so this is going to, you would need to be aware of that during deployment times. That service binding needs to be created, or it needs to exist in the namespace before job gets created. But that's the kind of limitation on the Kubernetes platform.
Okay.
That was, yeah, pretty much my understanding of the issue as well.
Any questions on this?
No. Well, how do we want to prioritize this is my kind of outstanding question. And perhaps this isn't the best time to do prioritization as per se.
We do have a call later on prioritization, actually. But yeah, I don't think. Have we been asked for this? How did we detect this bug?
So as I mentioned, Managed Kafka team, somebody from Managed Kafka team approached us, saying that he noticed that projection cannot be done on jobs, and this is how we got aware of that. He didn't specify any urgency on this, so I don't think it's very urgent, but at some point we would need to probably start supporting this, and perhaps there are some more immutable resources in the Kubernetes, so we should actually try to address them more or less. They all,
but those will be, it's not bugs, in fact. It's today we are not, it's features that we don't have. So to me,
we could claim that we are not supporting job. We can just claim what resources we support at the moment. Yes, we could document that. Or I don't know.
I think that's what I will do as a quick fix, so that it's clear in our documentation.
Mm-hmm.
And later on, we can work on adding those capabilities into the backlog accordingly. I don't think this is urgent. We have things that I think are going to have a bigger impact on the adoption.
Yeah.
Makes sense, Andy? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I think so. I guess the other moving on with issues, the other thing that we could probably give a status update on is we had some meetings this week regarding ARM support, and that kind of is in the pipeline for happening.
Yeah, this one is also another interesting one.
Yes.
Have we done an estimate about it?
That's already practically in work, or basically we solved the build part of this, so the image is there, and currently, the XD team requires to configure something on the infrastructure so that we can actually then fill up the advisory properly. I also requested from Shri the documentation approval for that advisory, but in the meantime, we are waiting for XDT team to configure something so that we can actually finally push to the ARM repository. But like we did the acceptance test run against OpenShift ARM cluster, everything was green, and we are basically, I would say, once we get, and hopefully the last info I got is that they're going to configure their part by the end of this week, so we could release that ARM image. I mean, what I'm saying, like 1.0 ARM image next week, easily.
Okay.
Okay, sounds good.
So we're going to be really one of the first operators on ARM, but at the beginning, there will be not much of benefit for the customers because none of the supported operators are available for ARM.
Yeah,
right
so
now.
that's why for me it's something, if we need to stop or to pause, there is no urgency on this one.
No, there is no urgency, but everything is ready, and since when it was because of that, so we can push ourselves and then work with the community to build things for ARM as well.
Okay.
Yeah, that was my impression. There wasn't a whole lot extra we had to do to get this working.
Yeah.
I think that's it for in terms of recent updates on issues. Unless there's anything else, I think we're good for this meeting.
Sounds good. Thank you. Oh, there's a question.
Shri,
Just
you have
wanted to
a
know this
question?
ARM support, would we be having this for GA 1.1 also? And will it have any docking port?
Say again, please.
We just saw this ARM support issue, right?
Yeah.
I'm asking, will we be having this for GA 1.1 and will it be having any docking port?
We are going to have it like we're going to actually releasing 1.0 version, like even 1.0 version going to be released like soon. And I mean, for 1.0, we don't have to have it as a GA, but my understanding is that the ARM support for OpenShift is going to be GA from 4.10. So at least then, I mean, all follow releases to service binding will include ARM images, and we should then go GA as similar as we are doing that right now for PowerPC and IBM Z.
So any idea around the time frame around when it will be?
4.10, not sure. So Stefan, do you know that more?
Sorry for
OpenShift 4.10, what is the release date for that?
first quarter of next week. The code freeze is before the Christmas break, and the release is scheduled later, beginning of the year.
So where is the docking pack for this? Would it be in the user guide or release notes for this issue, if there is one?
Sorry, what are you asking, Sri?
For the ARM support issue, I'm asking, is there any documentation in fact for this issue?
That's the very same operator, very same version. Everything what we're stating for the current architectures is valid for that architecture as well. So I don't think the documentation would differ anyhow.
No.
So you need to look at if there will be documentation that will be done for making OpenShift available on ARM on this architecture. And in this case, you need to make sure that service binding documentation will be there, and you will call out the compatibility of service binding operator with this architecture. I don't know how the documentation team is going to do it, but you need to make sure that into the compatibility of services that are provided on top of that architecture, service binding operator will be called out.
Okay, so I do have some samples of compatibility matrix for some of the release notes that we do for some components. I'll touch base with Predrag, and maybe from there we can discuss how we can include all this. Does it sound okay?
Sure, it's really your take on this, huh?
Yeah, in which case you might want to add the needs-docs label to that, so that we have to track and cover it. That's one request I would put in. Whatever issues when you triage, if you feel there is a document impact, please add the labels and specify what needs to be tracked, so that way we can put it in the doc plan accordingly.
Okay.
And I had one more question. I just pinged this link. Here I could see that for this issue, there is this comment saying a link to the documentation on what are the compatible services. And you also need a link to the documentation on how to use projecting binding data in the application source code. So what exactly do we mean by this? The last two bullet points, Stephen? You commented on October 21st on this issue.
Can you take? I'm really
something-
struggling with your ask. In fact,
Yeah, maybe let's take this offline. I think this is not something that we should. Let's cover. We can cover this later. Afterwards, async.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Sounds good. Are there any more questions for today? If not, then I think we can wrap up for today.
Sounds good. Thank you.
thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, guys.